Is there anybody left in this hall who believes in love at first sight? The sudden rush of desire? No checking what's in the pocket? Well, be prepared for the next blow. I bet some of you in your secret heart still believe that love is found in verse, in sentiment, in chemistry. Forget it. This is a burst of reality. Amy, how are you?
I'm good.
Okay, will you tell these people the secret of your successful romance?
I'm about to.
Good.
My name is Amy Webb, and a few years ago, I was coming out of yet another awful, horrible relationship. I'd met a lot of men, and every time the relationship started off fantastic, and then they came crumbling down to a terrible, terrible end. I'm smart, I'm interesting, and I thought, what am I doing wrong? Why does this keep happening to me? So I reached out to my friends and family, and of course, everybody had some advice, especially my grandmother, who said over and over again, stop being so picky. True love will find you when you least expect it. Now, as you'll start to learn, I'm a planner, and just about everything that I do involves some kind of math. And as I was starting to think about getting to the point where I would have a husband and some children, I sort of reverse engineered all of those years and plotted everything out on a graph. And I thought, at the moment, I'm in my 30s. It's probably going to take me 6 months of dating until I find somebody who's willing to be in a monogamous relationship with me and vice versa. Probably cohabitate somewhere between 10 months to a year. Maybe a year after that, we'll get engaged. A year after that, we'll finally get married. And then sometime, maybe 2 years later, we'll have a kid. And since family is what I was really most interested in, what I realized is that I actually should have gotten married 5 years ago. So if, according to my grandmother, my strategy was to least expect my way into true love, then really the only variable I had to play with was serendipity. And the question that I had was, what's the probability of my bumping in to Mr. Right? Well, at the time I was living in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a very, very large city, and I started factoring in the number of possible candidates. So, population of Philadelphia is 1.5 million. About half of them are men, so now the number is down to about 750,000. I was looking for somebody between the ages of 30 and 36, which was about 4% of the population in Philadelphia, which means now I have a standard set of 30,000 men. I was looking for somebody who was Jewish, and only 2.3% of the population in Philly is Jewish, so now I've got 690 possibilities. You figure that I'm attracted to maybe 1 out of 10 of those, bringing the number down to 69, and I absolutely refuse to date or marry anybody interested in sports. Testify, yes. So that meant 35 men in the entire city of Philadelphia. So I had a problem. Now, on top of all of this, I have a very large, very tight-knit family, and everybody was married, and everybody was having children, which put me under tremendous peer pressure to get my life going already. So I figure at this point I have 2 possible strategies. One, I can least expect my way into finding the 1 out of 35 possible men in the entire city of Philadelphia that I could date, or I could try online dating. Now, I liked the idea of online dating because online dating is predicated on algorithms. And don't let the word algorithm scare you. Really, algorithm is just a word to express a workflow. And so, you put some information in, you put some information back out, and hopefully everything combines together to give you the answer that you were looking for. And now, actually, we're all talking a lot about online dating now, but historically, algorithms in one form or another have been used throughout all cultures and throughout all generations. In fact, even in Judaism, there were ancient matchmakers who would do things like look at the probability of a girl liking a boy, the probability of their families getting along, whether or not they would have kids, what the community would think, what the rabbi would think, and without explicitly saying they were computing an algorithm, The matchmakers from thousands of years ago would use that information and compute whether or not two people should be married. Well, I thought, data plus algorithms will lead me to my Prince Charming. So I signed on. Now, you have to understand, at the time, I was incredibly busy, but that is really beside the point. In actuality, I hate filling out online forms more than anything. I hate any kind of quiz. And so, for me, going through question after question after question, asking about my favorite movies and whether or not I was a cat person, was like the ninth circle of hell. So instead, I copied and pasted highlights from my resume, including the bullet points. And so that meant that my online dating profile, in which I was trying to attract a man, went something like this. I was an award-winning journalist and a future thinker. I said under my specialties section that I really liked monetization, that I was fluent in Japanese, and also HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which was a super sexy way to start my online dating life. Now, obviously, this was a really, really terrible way to create an online dating profile, but the interesting thing was that the algorithms still set me up on plenty of dates, and plenty of men wanted to take me out. They wanted to take me out on truly awful dates. Now, we've all been there, and we've all been on terrible dates, and I just want to share one story with you that's sort of emblematic of my online dating life. And that was a date that I had with Steve, the IT guy. We immediately connected because he said that he loved gadgets. He said that he worked in the tech space, and that he really, really liked 80s music. So he asked me if I wanted to go out with him, and I said, sure, that sounds great. So he takes me to this white tablecloth, very, very fancy dinner and orders this extravagant meal. He doesn't even bother looking at the menu. He orders multiple appetizers, multiple entrees, and you have to understand, I come from a family where everybody gets to order one thing. So if you want cheese sticks, that's your dinner. That's it. So multiple dishes was sort of like a new thing to me. And he's ordering and ordering and ordering bottles of wine. And at this point, I sort of know that I probably don't want to go out with Steve again, but it's been an interesting enough, evening. So he gets up and excuses himself to go to the washroom. And then the check comes. And that's cool, I was more than I was expecting. I'm a modern woman, and I was willing to kick in some money for our bill, and the waiter comes by, and he's giving me that knowing glance, and I'm giving him that, I don't know what's going on, glance back. And 10 minutes pass, 15 minutes pass, 20 minutes pass, and suddenly I realize that I've just been taken out, and that was my entire month's rent. So I was pretty pissed off. As I would do after all of these terrible dates, I would call my mom, I would call my sister, and I would say, I've just been out on yet another date. And they would say, stop complaining. You're being too picky. And I said, fine. I'm going to prove to you with empirical evidence that it's not me, right? It's these men. So I create an email template and a number of data points that I'm going to start tracking. And I continue to date, but I only meet men at bars and restaurants that I know have Wi-Fi, and I bring my computer with me in a gigantic bag, and every 15 to 20 minutes, I excuse myself to go to the washroom to fill this thing out. So I'm tracking things like high fives, the number of times a guy forces me to raise my hand in the air. If you want to touch me, by all means, pat my leg, put your hand on my back, but don't force me to stick my hand in the air, right, and smack you. Stupid sexual remarks, bad vocabulary, the number of times somebody checks his mobile phone while I'm in the middle of a sentence, units of alcohol, questions about my job. So I'm tracking all of these things and emailing them back in real time. And I was also amassing all of this data so that later on I could do an analysis. And I came up with some really, really interesting correlations. For example, some of you are Scotch drinkers. I know it. Scotch drinkers overwhelmingly talked about kinky sex within the first 2 minutes of every first date. Now, as it turns out, these weren't all bad guys. They were just bad for me. And it wasn't the algorithms that were at fault. The algorithms are good. It's the information that we're putting in the algorithms that's not so great. Most of us don't answer all of the questions on these online polls and systems totally honestly. We tend to answer aspirationally. And as a result, if we put bad data in, bad data, ergo bad matches, is going to come back out on the other end. So I decided, fine, I'm going to develop a new plan. I'll continue online dating, but rather than relying on the system as it exists, I'm going to reverse engineer it and game it so that I can meet my match. So what I did was I started coming up with my own criteria list, my own set of questions. And I came up with a list of every single possible thing that I could want in a man. I start writing and writing and writing one night. And at the end, I had a list with 72 different data points. Now, this is hard to, think through, so I'll just highlight a few of them. I was looking for somebody who was Jew-ish, like me. Somebody who works hard, but not so hard that they forget to take breaks and vacations and stuff like that. I was looking for somebody with the exact same approach to parenting as I knew that I had, which meant that we were going to have kids, and they were going to start math lessons and computer science and music by the time that they were 3. I was also looking for somebody who would travel, but not cruise ship traveling, actual traveling, like hiking through Petra, Jordan. I was looking for somebody who would weigh 20 pounds more than me at all times, regardless of what I weighed. And I also wanted somebody who liked musicals, but not just any musical, like Evita. That one was okay. So I have this giant list now, and I knew that I needed to prioritize it. And so I was looking at things like attributes shared by my former boyfriends, attributes that were important to my family, and ultimately, attributes that were important to me. And as I go through and I start to look at everything on the list, I realized where I've started to make all of my mistakes in the past. Of all of my previous boyfriends and all those relationships, there were only 4 data points that they actually had. When I went through and thought about my parents and my family, there were about 14 data points that I knew would matter to them. And for me, there were about 25. So once I had all of these data points prioritized, I broke them into a top tier and a secondary tier, and I assigned a point value to each one of those data points. This is what that looked like. Once I had that done, I used a little math. I came up with a scoring system. And basically what I was doing was, instead of the algorithms matching me up with somebody, instead I would match myself up using math. And so I would refuse to go out with anybody or even respond to them unless they had met 700 points as a minimum threshold by going through the scoring system that I had built. For 900 points, I would agree to go on a date, and for 1,500 points, and no less, I would consider being in a long-term relationship. So I thought, this is brilliant. Right? So I log back on, and immediately I find Jewish Doc 57. He seemed eerily perfect. He loved to travel alone. He mentioned that he liked to hike and climb Mount Fuji and the Great Wall. He specifically said he didn't like cruise ship traveling, and I thought, this is amazing. This is perfect. I have just found the Jewish Prince Charming of my mother's dreams. There was just one problem. He didn't like me back. Now, I realized that I put my resume information as my data profile, and maybe I didn't have the best photos, but I thought, you know what? I'm a good person. I'm smart. I'm interesting. There must be something wrong here. I guess the one variable I had forgotten about was my competition. Who were the other people on this site that ostensibly were doing better than me? So at that moment, I decided maybe I should log back in, but this time as a man, and see who the other women were on the dating site. And that's when I saw Smiley Girl. Smiley Girl, 1978, was 5'3" and 120 pounds. She was a fun girl who was happy and outgoing and listed her job as teacher. She said she was silly, nice, and friendly. She loves to make people laugh and to laugh a lot. She likes to have a great time, was looking for somebody with a genuine sense of humor. Who is this woman? Why can't she spell? Well, at this moment, I knew I needed to do some market research. Now, don't hate me for what I'm about to say, but I decided to make 10 fake male profiles. This wasn't about me spying on other women or trying to create some kind of crazy, weird relationship with them. I just wanted to collect data. In the real world, if I was to go into a bar and look around and meet a guy, I couldn't somehow turn myself off so that I couldn't see all of the women there, right? I'm going to see everybody else, and I'm going to make strategic decisions based on that information. So I decided to do the same thing online. But I didn't just create any male profile. I created 10 male archetypes that fit specifically within the minimum point values in my scoring system. And I had complete and detailed information about each one. In short, I would have been happy to marry any one of the 10 versions of this perfect man that I had created. I also established some rules. During my data collection, I was really only interested in qualitative and quantitative data. So stuff like humor, tone, communication style, what were the most popular women on these sites using to be effective. And for quantitative data, stuff like the average length of a profile for the most successful daters, the time spent between messages. Basically, why were these daters so successful when I wasn't? So I spent the next month collecting information, and at the end of that time, I had some pretty interesting results. For one, as it turns out, content matters a lot. So the most successful online daters didn't write 3,000-word-long explanations that were crafted, and fabulously interesting. They stuck to 97 words. And they were pretty non-specific in the stuff that they liked. So for example, I originally said that I loved The English Patient, but as it turns out, not a lot of people like that movie. In fact, some people have really strong feelings about it. So instead, it's good to say that you like historical or period dramas. Also, using optimistic language turns out to be a really, really important piece of the puzzle. You need to paint a picture of yourself as somebody who's enjoyable to hang out with, who has a lot of great ideas, so that the other person can see themselves fitting into your amazing life. And also, timing was really important. We forget that in the real world, right, we probably wouldn't talk to somebody every 5 seconds, but because we all have mobile phones now, we can very quickly text message somebody back and forth or send emails, even if it's 3 o'clock in the morning. If you wouldn't have a face-to-face conversation with somebody, in the real world, you shouldn't be doing that same activity online. And then there were the photos. So I knew that the photos that I used were probably not fantastic. But as it turns out, there were some similarities among the photos of online daters who were successful. And obviously one of those things was showing skin in a healthy way that didn't seem smutty. So once I had all of this information together, I did a deep data analysis and some regression analysis too. And what I wound up with at the end was a super profile. It was me, but it was me optimized for the site. I said I was honest about my height and my weight. I said that I was culturally Jewish. I didn't bother to try to explain what I do for a living. And I used about 97 keywords that were optimized specifically for the website and the other people on it. And as it turns out, I did a really good job. The problem was that everybody who wanted to talk to me only scored a minimum of 650 points. And everybody around me said, how could you possibly not go out with these men? You're super popular. And I said, they don't have enough points. And they said, you're still being too damn picky. Well, not too long after that, I met this guy, Thevenin, who used a username that had sort of an insider electrical engineering joke. I loved what he said that he did for a living, Arctic baby seal hunter, which I thought was funny. He looked exactly like I wanted him to look. He wrote a lot of really great stuff in his profile, and right off the bat, without even talking to him, he had scored 850 points. It was enough for a date. Well, 3 weeks later, we went out on what turns out to have been my very last ever first date. But I still came home and scored him. And it turns out he had crossed the 1,000-point threshold. And I knew all this time I haven't been picky enough. So about a year after that, we were non-cruise ship traveling in Petra, Jordan, when he got down on his knee and asked me to marry him. A year after that, we got married. And about a year and a half after that, our daughter, Petra, was born. So obviously, I have a fabulous life. What does all this mean for you? Well, as it turns out, there is an algorithm for love, but it's one that you write yourself. So don't worry about relying on all of the math and somebody else's system. You actually have to figure out exactly what you're looking for, and you have to be brave enough to go after exactly what you want and not to ever take no for an answer. So on my wedding night, I'm talking to my grandmother, and she says, you know, maybe it was okay that you picked a little bit. And I said, thanks, Grandma. Do you have any additional advice for me now that I'm about to be a married woman? And she said, your matzo balls. Your matzo balls are too hard. They need to be a little more fluffy. And I'll take her advice on that.
Amy, did you notice that all these hard-bitten math geeks out here went, ah, ah.